Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. Today we're tackling this age-old question. Is there a connection between creative genius and mental illness? And to explore it, we're going to be looking at Charles Dickens.
That's a fascinating question. Dickens, with his larger-than-life characters, the dark humor. It's kind of the perfect backdrop to explore this, right?
Totally. So to kick things off, I was reading Claire Tomalin's biography, Charles Dickens. Life, and there's this incident. A 19-year-old Dickens, serving as a juror, has to witness a baby's autopsy at a workhouse.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty intense, right?
That must have been disturbing, yeah. What really stands out is Dickens's reaction to it. Tomlin really highlights his descriptions, how vivid they were, and how this experience just stayed with him. It's kind of reflected, in his work, his preoccupation with poverty, social injustice, the plight of children. It's everywhere in his novels.
It's like this early encounter just imprinted itself on his mind, like it became a driving force. Which brings us to Dickens' own struggles. His battles with depression, anxiety, even these things he called specters and phantoms.
Right. And it's important to remember that how they talked about mental health back then in Victorian England was very different from today. Like those specters and phantoms, maybe they saw them as supernatural things or just a way to express distress.
Yeah, that makes sense. We can't really diagnose someone from Dickens' time, right?
Right, exactly.
But it does make you think, what was he actually going through? And how did it affect his creativity?
Yeah.
And speaking of things that probably affected him, the blacking factory. Working there at 12 when his dad was in prison for debt, that had to be traumatic.
Oh, absolutely. The shame, the abandonment. Tomlin makes it clear how deeply this scarred him. And you see it in his characters, too. So many of them are outcasts, just trying to survive on the edges of society.
Right. It's like he's pouring his own feelings, that vulnerability and isolation, right into his writing and his work with prostitutes later in life, helping these marginalized people, the ones society judged. Makes you wonder if that's connected to the blacking factory, right? Like, he understands what it's like to be an outsider.
It's a really interesting thought. Maybe those dark experiences, they kind of fueled his empathy, his compassion for others.
Right, right.
It's interesting. And then this brings us to how he portrays mental illness, the instability in his characters, like Squeers from Nicholas Nickleby, Quilp in The Old Curiosity Shop. They're these over-the-top characters, almost grotesque, but he does it with this dark humor.
Yeah, Quilp especially. He's physically deformed, malicious. He just seems to love causing chaos. It's like Dickens is giving a physical form to this twisted mental state.
Yeah, and he uses humor, which is kind of his signature, right? But it raises this question, doesn't it? Was he using these exaggerated portrayals to deal with his own anxieties? Or was it just how people saw mental illness back then? It was a time when mental illness was stigmatized, hidden.
Right, so we're seeing this potential link between his struggles and his work. But it's a complex one.
Yeah.
And his personal relationships weren't simple either.
Not at all. His family life was full of contradictions. He'd write these idealized versions of family, but his own marriage was really difficult. He eventually separated from his wife. There were rumors of an affair with a much younger actress, Nellie Ternan.
It's a good reminder that even these huge literary figures have complicated lives.
The definite way.
And it makes you think, how did those personal struggles affect his writing? Was he channeling that turmoil into his characters, the themes he explored?
It's a great question. We can't know for sure, but it's fascinating to think about. And there's another interesting thing about Dickens, his love for theater. Not just watching it, but performing. He loved acting, and he'd do dramatic readings of his work.
Wow. I bet those readings were captivating. Dickens himself, bringing his characters to life.
Absolutely.
But they weren't just lighthearted performances, right?
No, not at all. They were physically and emotionally demanding, especially his reading of the murder scene from Oliver Twist, Sykes and Nancy. The intensity, the emotion of performing those dark scenes, it must have been a lot to handle.
It's like he used the stage to confront the dark parts of his writing, to exercise them in this very public way.
Yeah. Makes you think about performance, right? And processing tough emotions. Like so many artists use creative expression as an outlet, dealing with their inner stuff.
It's like a timeless human thing, turning pain into art. But coming back to our question, creativity and mental illness, what do the experts say? The people who have studied Dickens, I mean.
Well, Tomalin quotes a few scholars in her book, And there are different opinions. Some say Dickens' struggles were tied to his genius, that the dark stuff, it fueled his creativity.
Yeah, there's that romantic idea, the tortured artist, right?
Right, but we have to be careful about romanticizing mental illness. It's not like you need it to be creative.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be glorified.
Oh, for sure. And some scholars Tomlin talks about, they're more cautious, saying, yeah, his experiences influenced his work, but we can't say for sure mental illness made him a genius.
It's tricky. We're looking at someone from a totally different time.
Yeah.
We can't just diagnose him with today's standards, but we can look at the history, the language he used, how he dealt with his inner world.
And that's where it gets interesting, because even without a diagnosis, you see these patterns in his life, his work. It suggests a connection between his emotions and his writing.
Exactly. His letters, for example, they show these intense mood swings, like deep sadness, then bursts of energy. And we see that in his writing, too. The way he goes from humor to sadness, light to dark.
It's part of what makes him so captivating to read. You know, he wasn't afraid to explore the full spectrum of human emotions.
Totally. And that fearlessness, that willingness to go to the dark places, it still resonates with readers today.
Definitely. So we might never have a clear answer to this mad genius question, but just asking it, digging into his life and work,
it's valuable.
that becomes a journey, not just about Dickens, but about what it means to be human.
Absolutely. And, you know, as we talk, I keep thinking about his characters. They're so vivid, so memorable. Even the villains have this magnetism.
Right. That's the sign of a great storyteller, creating characters that jump off the page and stay with you.
And rereading some of his novels, I noticed this theme, these complex relationships between parents and children. It's everywhere.
It is, and he explores it in so many ways. You see it in David Copperfield, how he's neglected and abused by his stepfather, Mr. Murdstone, or Pippin the Convict, Magwitch, in Great Expectations, and Mrs. Gradgrind in Hard Times, so rigid and emotionally distant, trying to crush her kids' imaginations with her strict worldview. Makes you wonder if Dickens was dealing with his own childhood, his feelings about his parents, through these stories.
It's a very valid interpretation. We know he felt abandoned by his parents, especially during the blacking factory years.
And even after his family was reunited, it seems like he still felt resentment, like they never understood his pain.
Yeah, those emotional wounds can last. It makes sense that they'd appear in his writing, maybe as a way to process it, to give voice to that childhood pain.
But it's not all negative, right? He also explores that longing for connection, for belonging.
Oh, definitely. Think about Oliver Twist, desperately searching for a loving family, or Esther Summerson and John Jarndyce in Bleak House, that bond that grows between them.
It's like he's wrestling with his past, but also imagining a world where those wounds can heal, where love and compassion win.
And that's what makes his writing so powerful, that back and forth between darkness and light.
It makes him timeless. He was writing about specific problems in Victorian England, but those themes, poverty, injustice, family issues, the need for love, they're universal, still relevant today.
Totally. They're struggles that everyone faces. And Dickens's ability to show them with such empathy, such honesty, that's why we're still reading him today.
It's what makes him a giant. And even if we never fully understand his genius exploring his life, his work, his inner world, it's incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even these famous people, they're complex, they're flawed, and sometimes their struggles, their weaknesses, they're the source of their greatest strengths.
It's true. Now, here's something to think about. What if Dickens was alive today, with therapy, medication, a better understanding of mental health? Would his writing be different? Would those dark, imaginative worlds he created be as powerful?
It's a great question. It makes us think about the connection between creativity and mental health, and how it's not so simple.
Right. It's complicated, and who knows, maybe with more support, Dickens would have achieved even more. Or maybe those struggles, they were essential to his creative process.
Maybe the darkness was part of his brilliance. We'll never know for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
You know, it's amazing how much Dickens' work still means to people today. His characters, his stories, how he captures, like, the human experience. It's pretty incredible.
It's the power of those themes, you know? He was writing in Victorian England, but those issues, those struggles, they're still with us. Poverty, injustice, looking for love and a place to belong, it's all timeless.
Yeah, you're right. And as we kind of wrap up this look at Dickens, it's good to remember, behind those stories, those characters, there was a real guy, someone dealing with his own stuff, his own ups and downs.
It's easy to put authors on a pedestal, right?
Yeah.
Especially the ones we consider great, but they were human, with all the complications that come with that.
Exactly. And maybe that's part of why Dickens' work is so powerful. He wasn't afraid of the dark parts, those messy, contradictory emotions we all have. He showed us the beauty in the ugliness, the humor in the heartbreak, what it means to be human.
And he did it with such incredible skill. The language, the images, those worlds he created, they feel both familiar and fantastical. It's really something.
So if anyone hasn't read Dickens in a while, or maybe never at all, I'd say give it a shot. You might be surprised how much it still speaks to you today.
You might even learn something new about yourself, but the world, through his words.
And as we kind of leave you to think about this creativity and mental illness link, just remember, it's not a simple thing. There's no one answer, right? What's true for one person might not be for another.
The mind is a mysterious thing. And creativity, it's affected by all sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and be open to new ideas. And who knows, maybe you'll find your own mad genius inside.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Charles Dickens. Until next time.